Hello, everyone, and welcome to our podcast, Clear as Mud, where we talk to artists from all walks of life to discuss their personal and professional journeys that led them to where they are today. I'm one of your hosts, Graham Waldrop, and riding shotgun this week is Joseph Bell. Joseph, welcome back, sir.
Good to be back, Graham.
Joseph, tell the people out there who we're talking to today and why he's so significant.
Yeah, we're talking to Jeff Curley, a fellow SCAD alum. He actually was part of our year. Really happy to speak with him and see what's been going on with his life.
Yeah, he's a producer at WB Boston. For those of you that don't know, WB Boston makes a lot of mobile games and big, massive online games like Lord of the Rings Online, Dungeons & Dragons Online. The project that Jeff is currently working on is Game of Thrones Conquest. So one of the cool things about talking with Jeff, beyond, he's our friend, we've known him for, over 10 years at this point?
Just around there.
Yeah, is basically how he worked his way into a producer role. So I think anyone who wants to get into the industry, if you're listening to this this episode, I think this will be very beneficial for you to sort of learn where you need to start and who you need to know and how do you network at a company, even if you're not going to work at that company forever. Jeff hasn't just worked at WB Boston his whole career. He's bounced around and eventually wound up there. But it was the job he had before WB Boston that really prepared him for this producing role. So I think, like I said, really beneficial if you're looking to break into the industry, or if you are in the industry, you can probably relate to what Jeff had to go through. We also get into crunch, Joseph. We talk about crunch, the touchiest subject in the industry. So that was also fascinating to get a firsthand perspective from someone who has dealt with that and continues to deal with that.
Yeah, and he goes through different options of how to mitigate it as well. So just lessons learned.
Yeah. So, all right, that's enough from us. We'll get straight into the interview with Jeff Curley here on Clear as Mud. So Jeff, one of the funniest things to me was when we were at SCAD, we were doing portfolio review stuff. And I went through my whole spiel about wanting to be a producer on games, and you were looking at me like, it sounds cool, but I know you like to organize people and tell them what to do and get things done, but I don't know if that position really exists.
Yeah.
And I was like, it exists. I'm telling you, I've done the research. And you're like, well, okay, yep, man, whatever. And here you are now. Here you are now as a producer.
I have thought about that many a times with a mix of embarrassment and nostalgia. And I think that honestly, the reason why is that the SCAD curriculum just goes so heavy into be self-organizers, make an indie game, and do the thing that the people on Super Meat Boy did, or all of those guys. And it's okay, well, they're all self-organizers, and I kind of have a hard time seeing any person being a dedicated project manager role. So it's definitely my own fault for not knowing the research and digging into exactly what that position does. But it's just I don't think that they really reinforced that type of role to us when we were in school.
No, they didn't. It was very much you will be an artist, you will be a level designer, with maybe a side of programming sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah, there was no producerial program at that school or anything like that. So it was all just, you had to just find it on your own if you wanted to specialize in that there. But it's really cool that have you aboard here, and you're the first person that from our class or from SCAD that's joined the show so far.
Yeah, very exciting to be able to reunite with you guys and be able to talk shop a little bit. It's been too long.
Yeah, for sure. So we all know this, but Jeff, you grew up in Massachusetts, right?
I did. I actually returned up here in the north after I graduated from SCAD. So I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts called Boxborough, not to be confused with Foxborough, where the Patriots Stadium is. It's very much deep into the the historical areas of Massachusetts, right near Concord, pretty close to Boston, where you can do the Freedom Trail and all that stuff. So I've lived up here for basically my entire life, except for the 4 years we were in school, and I've been here since we left.
When did you start getting the game itch in terms of
either wanting to make games. I guess, yeah, more so wanting to make games. I mean, we all, I think, at an early age were exposed to video games, but we actually considered, I think this would be something to do.
Yeah, I mean, the initial like time when I first realized that's something that I wanted to do was actually like at a super young age. And I even remember the two games that made me want to make games when I grew up, which was Zelda Ocarina of Time and StarCraft, which I think were 97 and 98 respectively. So I was still a youngin' at that time. And they kind of like were really pivotal pieces in games for me because they really like established in my mind like exactly what the medium and like the art form could be as far as like a sense of adventure and a sense of storytelling and stuff like that. Like StarCraft was my first real big like space opera type of story, and Zelda is kind of like a fantasy adventure, kind of similar to like what you would see in movies at the time, but you actually get to do it yourself. And ever since then, when I was like I think probably 5 or 6 years old, I was like, when I grow up, I want to be a game developer. That's my dream job. I want to make games. And, like especially at that time when like games wasn't really widely considered like a like lucrative career path of like, people didn't really think about game developers. Like, sure, games have to come from people making them, but like, it's not really considered something that like people got into within like common social recognition, but I stuck with that desire to make games for most of my life growing up. And once it came time to pick schools, that's what I told my what do they call those? Like not career counselors, but like the counselors that like help you figure out like, okay, what kind of school do you want to go to? So I started talking to them about like game development programs, and they're like, oh, well, one of the best ones in the country is SCAD, and I told them that I wanted to like meet people that think differently than I do, because I don't really consider myself an artist, but going to an art school I thought would be really good for me because I get to collaborate with people that problem solve in a different way. And that's very much, I think that was like a really great decision because like working in games, it is a very collaborative space with people coming from all different skills and backgrounds. So that's kind of how I got into my desire to make games.
Did you like prototype anything before going to SCAD? Were you like thinking about games, thinking about designing games, or did you make anything before you decided to look at SCAD as an opportunity for college?
I did a little bit. StarCraft was actually one of the games that was really pivotal in that area as well, because it had its own like built-in editor where you could make your own content and stuff. And when I was really young, I would kind of just mess around with the tools and like see what kind of like interesting stuff that I can make. And that's where I kind of first learned the concept of like a if-then statement, because they had a system called triggers, which is like, oh, under these conditions, then these things will happen. So that's like the most basic building blocks of programming, which I thought was really cool when I could first make some things happen. And the first like actual like tangible thing that was like a like playable thing that I could say that I made was my cousin and I actually participated in this contest before StarCraft 2 came out, which was to make a series of missions that would encapsulate what they referred to as a campaign, and submit it to this like online like creative community that made StarCraft campaigns. And I think top 3 winners would get like some kind of prizes, and then I think everyone that participated also got beta keys to access to StarCraft 2 beta, which was like the most anticipated game of my entire life. And to this day, I don't think that there will ever be another game where I am more excited to play, because I waited 12 years for that game to come out.
With that thought process of going through and trying to figure out how to build a campaign in StarCraft, I guess like using that being on a computer helped you out a lot with being able to learn some of those processes too, right? So you were playing across not only consoles but PC games, and that gave you kind of access into trying things out and messing around with the actual game code.
Absolutely. Like that's one of the things that like at that time, there weren't really a whole lot of like console games that allowed for user created content. Like we have a bit more of that now. Like there are games, well, I guess Little Big Planet's like a little bit of a dead franchise, but Super Mario Maker is definitely still something that's really popular. There's like a couple other games you can find here and there that allow for user created content. And those are all on consoles. But at the time, there wasn't really anything, or at least nothing that I was aware of, that allowed for making content on consoles, because all of that stuff was on PC. And like when Warcraft 3 came out in the early to mid 2000s, then I started to spend some time in that as well. So I tend to consider myself more of a console gamer, but that was one of the benefits that I saw at that time of playing PC games, is that it actually allowed me to like flourish in my creativity of making making content that would lead me on the career path that I'm on now.
I can't remember. Did you want to do programming or level design? I remember there was a game, I think Josef, or not a game, but a sort of level that was made at SCAD that you worked on. I think Josef worked on it too, where you guys won some award.
Pulse? Was it?
Yes, that was Pulse.
Or was it? Yeah.
Yeah, and you kept going, I'm an award-winning level designer, which is like the cutest thing in the world, as you know, being this really grizzled old veteran person that I was. I was older than all of you, so I was like, oh, look at these kids.
By 2 years.
Yeah, I know, it felt like a lot more.
Old man.
You know, the innocence was still in your eyes. But did you want to do level design or I can't remember what you really wanted to focus on when you were at SCAD, but even beforehand, did you know, like, I want to go in this specific area or not?
I was very, I guess, uneducated before I went into college, as far as like what all the different roles were. Like I knew that like game designer was a thing, and I knew that level designer was a thing, but I wasn't aware of like all like the nuances or specialization that you can get into within the like the field. And that applies to basically like every discipline. So like art, design, engineering, like they all have different specializations and stuff like that. So there's a lot of areas where I just wasn't really familiar with. In going back to that portfolio class that you had mentioned, Graham, I remember that my focus for what I had aspired to do at the time was I wanted to be what is often referred to as a narrative designer, which is someone who comes up with gameplay scenarios that service narrative. So you kind of do like a little bit of like a writer and a designer role combined into one. And for a variety of reasons, I ended up not pursuing that. The biggest one being that, like, when I actually got into the field and I saw people that were doing the things that I wanted to do, it's like, wow, they're way better at designing things or writing things than I could ever really hope to be. Not that it didn't still interest me. It's just that, like, seeing what good looks like in those types of roles, I was like, oh, wow, okay, so this is like, they've been doing things related to this for a very long time, and this is kind of like their core skill set. And as I worked in the industry and like started to get more of a feel of all the different roles, including the production field that I am now in, I realized that suited my more natural talents, especially with like the work that we did when we were in school, is like kind of coordinating and coming up with a lot of the different types of like assets that we would need to make for all the different aspects of like the level that we built within Pulse, or coming up with some of the plans for our senior studio project. So that kind of suited where my skills were, and I actually feel that I am enjoying the work that I do now more than I would if I were to try to pursue that narrative design role as I had originally intended.
So that's not disappointing to you at all in any way?
No, not really. I mean, I like getting into games was like the childhood dream. And I think that at its core is kind of like that is the core of what I aspired to do throughout the entire journey up to where I am now. And I think that it was really a matter of wanting to do something in games that I was good at, and something that I felt like I could be like a really core contributor to. Because part of where the narrative designer aspirations came from, I think came a lot from that project that I worked on for StarCraft and that competition with my cousin, where it's like, oh, I love games with like really deep lore, and I love making narrative focused content and stuff like that, and being able to contribute to a canon. But I feel like that was where I really, what I enjoyed about games as a gamer rather than what I enjoyed about games as a developer in terms of my actual relationship with them. I think that the sort of project management and like helping other people do their best work is what I actually am really passionate about within the industry as a developer.
Yeah, that's an important distinction, because I mean, the producer still has, quite the influence on the project in every aspect, not just a singular one. So yeah, you're still contributing in a multitude of ways.
Absolutely.
The production side is a lot about solving problems for the people that are solving problems for the people that are actually playing the game, right? So you get to touch everything or touch a lot of different things inside a game development. Is that type of experience over on your end as well?
Yeah, I'd say that that's a really big part of it. And I mean, the bigger of the team that you work on, like the bigger the company that you work on, then I guess the more specialized, for lack of a better term, I'll say that you have to be. Because like if you work on a team of like 20 and like your whole company is only 20 people, then you might be able to do with like maybe only one or two like producers / project managers, and they'll naturally have a hand in like a little bit of everything. Whereas at WB, we have a staff of, I think now we're like a little over 100, maybe 110 or 120. And there's a team of, I want to say like 6 or 7 producers. And we all have to focus on like individual teams as well as like supporting different disciplines. So for my own role as a producer, I support the live operations team, which is a mix of designers, artists, QA testers, product managers, and community managers. Not as much engineering on that particular team. But then I also support the entire design discipline as a whole. So all of our designers, I facilitate the work that they do and make sure that we have the resources that we need for us to be able to do our best work there. And then I also support a team that's referred to as Live Tools, which is our internal tools that we use for our development to help like boost our productivity and kind of create patterns that makes their work a little bit easier and faster, which is a team that is entirely engineers. So I touch a little bit of like every discipline, but obviously there's way more stuff going on at the company that I don't have my hands in because there's just way too much for one person to be able to feasibly do.
So before we jump more into producing things, tell me about your SCAD experience. Because you were like, when I met you, you were like the most popular dude in the world. And not that you go to SCAD for popularity or it's like high school or anything, but it felt like you were in like, you had like your core like friend group with Bryce and Batman and guys like that. But you also, everywhere you went, it was like you were great friends. It seemed like with people across disciplines. I was like, how does this guy have the time to be friends with everyone?
You know, it's interesting because, and I've often talked about that with my core group, like with Akil and Batman and Bryce, like you mentioned. Freshman year was definitely a year where like the entirety of the freshman class, especially in Springhouse, which is the dorm that I lived in. I know that both of you guys were commuters to SCAD, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So like Springhouse was definitely like a community unto itself where like a lot of the freshman class was already congregating there and like getting to know each other and stuff like that. And especially during the first snowpocalypse that we had, which is always a hilarious notion to me being someone from the North, is that like the school was shut down for like a week straight. And so like we were all just kind of hanging out at the dorms, like trying to figure out what to do. So a lot of people were just hanging out with each other and honestly probably getting a little frustrated at each other because of just cabin fever. But like there's a lot of time sort of spent on just like fostering that community. And I was definitely spending a good amount of time with people during that year. And as time went on, like those relationships kind of continued to either develop or fade or evolve in whatever way that they would. And then we'd start to get to know like underclassmen and stuff like that. Because I was at Springhouse for all 4 years that I was there. And it got to the point where I actually applied to be a resident assistant at Springhouse and got the job and started my spring quarter of junior year. Because I think one of the RAs that they had graduated, and so I filled in that spot. And then senior year was when it was like more established. Like I had my own room and everything, and had my own like section that I was like these are the residents that I was quote unquote in charge of. But also like on top of all that, and I think that part of what helped get me the resident assistant job was that I had like kind of self-organized a film club at Springhouse where every Friday night or most Friday nights we would get access to the projector room in Springhouse, and we would just like watch a movie. And like I started up a Facebook group where like people could vote on the stuff that we would watch or like put up suggestions or whatever. So I think that was like all of those factors, especially being an RA and especially with doing that like film club thing, is kind of what got more people to know who I was. And even like people that were outside of Springhouse like would come in and like come and watch movies. Like I think the movie that we had the highest attendance for was after Avengers had come out on DVD and Blu-ray, and that was I think the first movie that we watched. I want to say that was fall quarter of freshman or of senior year. So that was like the big sort of inaugural kickoff of like the year's worth of film club. And like that TV room, I don't know if you guys remember the TV room at the front of Springhouse, but it was like literally packed.
Yeah,
like,
to the gills.
It was hot as fuck in there. Like, there's so many people just radiating heat because the whole place was full of people.
It was just a sweaty room of 18 to 21 year olds.
That was a regular thing that happened. That room would often stink.
And then how did that impact kind of your academic stuff, having to balance the social stuff and the academic?
I mean, it wasn't really too difficult for the most part because like the thing that like my buddies like Batman and Akil and Bryce and I like, always talk about that was like so weird, and it's funny that you bring up the whole like quote unquote popularity thing because there are always these people that like would be like, oh, hi, Jeff, like, how's it going? Like, try to like just like strike up conversation with me and stuff like that. But I honestly didn't spend a whole lot of like close time with that many people. It was mostly just like hanging out in my room with like my core group. And then like, you guys and I would like get together every once in a while. Like we'd like go over to somebody's place and like have like a small like get together or play games or whatever, have late nights at the DMC. But like a lot of those people that would come up to me are not necessarily people that I would be spending that much time with. It was just more of like, they knew me by reputation and like I was friendly with them. But they weren't like people that I hung out with, if that makes any sense.
Right. So that's the truth. That's the truth behind the mask. Because it is always like, it seemed like no matter who it was just like you guys were bosom buddies, been best friends for years. That's how it felt. You always did a great job of treating people just in a way like you wanted to hang out with you. So it was, I don't know. I was always very impressed by that. There was never like a disingenuine, like, yeah, how you doing or anything. Like, you know, I do that all the time when I was, before COVID and we were, you know, going around and stuff. It's like, sometimes I just don't want to talk to anybody, but you were always very affable, which I always respected no matter what mood you were in or anything like that. So
I appreciate that, man. And I think that that's something that actually is really important for like the line of work that I'm in, because like the best thing that a producer can be is someone who's really approachable no matter the circumstances. Because if you don't give off the impression or the vibes that you're like there to help people or you're there to be like a friendly face or to like listen if they're struggling with stuff like that, then that's when you are more likely to have people kind of keep things bottled up, or like if there's like work related issues or personal issues or whatever that like you as a producer are able to help with. If you are not giving off that impression that you're approachable, then they may just keep those to themselves, and that can end up putting undue stress on a lot of the people in the company.
But you're right. Exactly right. It's like a chain reaction sort of thing where, you know, it starts from the top, right? If someone's at the top is like unapproachable, and that sets the tone, and then other people, you know, in their own disciplines might not talk. You know, it really is an interesting kind of domino effect that happens with whoever is at the top or near the top doesn't set the right tone. Then it can adversely affect the team.
Absolutely, and it's it can depend on the environment that you're in too, as far as like how old the company is or how long people have been there and stuff like that. Because like I find like the company I'm at right now, WB Games Boston, is by far the oldest company out of the ones that I've been at, because it used to be called Turbine before it was acquired by WB Games, and they're the developers for a lot of like still running to this day MMO titles. So they made Lord of the Rings Online and Dungeons and Dragons Online as probably their two most noteworthy ones, and then they did pretty old classic one that actually just shut down a couple of years ago called Asheron's Call. And some of the people that I work with are people that worked on those games, like when they first came out, like back in like the early to mid 2000s. So they're people that I'm working with that have been at this company for like 10, 15, maybe even up to 20 years. And with that level of experience and with how big the company is and how much history they have, there can sometimes be some, for lack of a better term, like baggage or distrust between disciplines based off of like previous experiences with like previous regimes and stuff like that. So if you're able to help bridge that gap between different disciplines by like facilitating both sides work and both sides conversation and goals and stuff like that, and for people who like just like Turbine had kind of a bad experience with producers in the past, like they had people that were not particularly effective or that they just felt like they had kind of like hidden agendas. And I think that helping to set an example of like how approachable and how in their corner a producer can be can also really help to change people's perspectives and build more of a collaborative spirit with people that they otherwise wouldn't be quite as comfortable working with or coming to.
We graduated in 2014.
Yep.
Right. Yeah. So, and you bounced around a couple different companies before we are now at WB Boston. So with people having that much experience, right, and coming into that, like you didn't have that much experience at that point. So I mean, was that like intimidating coming in and being like, man, these guys, like a lot of these people are like, super industry veterans here?
I wouldn't necessarily say it was intimidating as much as that I just needed to learn a little bit more of where they were coming from. And I had the benefit of people in leadership positions within WB being very supportive of me and like recognizing that I was a person that was like I wanted to help them and I wanted to do the best that I could and figure out what their needs were so that I could try to support them as best as I could. Which I think was something that they weren't necessarily always used to. And because of that, they helped to get me into situations where I could better communicate with those people and kind of so that they could start to see the same thing that like the directors were seeing in me and that like I'm there to help them and stuff like that. So there weren't really necessarily as many walls to break through or climb over with them as much as it was like, there's a lot of people to get to know here, and a lot of these people have a lot of stories to tell about why they are the way that they are. So just learning more about that, learning about how they like to work and operate and what role I can play in making that better for them, I think was where a lot of that work came from. And I think that it's gone pretty well over the years that I've been there. I'll be, I think I'm at like 3.5 years now at WB Games. It'll be 4 years in October. And yeah, it's been really great since I've been here. And this is the company that I've been at the longest, which a lot of companies, especially as they're first starting out, contracts or layoffs or whatever can often lead to people only being there for anywhere between like 6 months or like 2 years. So it's great to be at one place for a long time.
Yeah, no, it's a really good run. And tell me about when the producing flip got switched. Or switch got flipped, however you want to say it. Like when was that? Like when did that sort of become more of an option for you?
Yeah, I think so. When I graduated, I was still in the mindset of I want to be a narrative designer. I was recognizing that becoming a narrative designer right after graduating is not necessarily going to be a feasible option because you kind of have to do the more entry level positions, the like, quote unquote, like pay your dues and do the work that you wouldn't otherwise necessarily be clamoring for because you're just trying to get a foot in the door. And as I was going through that process, it reminded me a lot of, do you remember at SCAD, I forget the name of the GDX. That was the name of it. It was the
oh yes, GDX,
the little expo thing that they did in Savannah, which they eventually stopped inviting Atlanta people to actually physically go there, which was hilarious to me.
I didn't know that because I know I only went to one, and so we never found out why they didn't invite us down anymore.
I don't know if a reason was ever stated. The vibes that I had gotten was that it felt a little I don't know if political is the right term, but we definitely felt like a little bit of second-class citizens in the...
Territorial is probably the better term there.
What's that?
The territorial, like, so with SCAD, Savannah and Atlanta are very different culturally in terms of the teaching and the students there. So yeah, it definitely felt like stepping into a completely different college whenever we went down to Savannah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and both campuses talk shit about each other. I mean, it's just the way it is. There is a rivalry.
There definitely
It's because
was.
Atlanta was the best, so yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I can't remember what the original point was. You started saying talking about GDX.
Yeah, so you were talking about how did the producer switch get flipped in my mind,
right?
And the reason why I brought up GDX is because one of the speakers the first year that we went there, Joseph, I know that you were there that year. I can't remember if Graham, you came with us that year as well, but there was this dude who I think he was at the time working at like Infinity Ward or Treyarch, like one of the companies that makes the Call of Duty games, and he was a lighting guy. I'll never forget because he was like super nervous up on that stage, and I was like, "Oh, I feel your pain, buddy. I'd be the same way if I were there in your shoes." But his resume included I forget if it was like a Hello Kitty game or like a Barbie's Horse Adventure game or something like that. And like he said something about that being like him paying his dues, and it's like I totally feel that now because like I worked in QA to start out. And then I did customer service at my second game company. And like, those are not the game roles that I aspired to be in, but that is the version of paying my dues that I had to do. And so anyway, getting into like the actual, like approaching the switch flipping is that as I entered into like the early stages of my game development career, and I got to see more people doing like the roles that I was aspiring to do or like that I was interested in. Like I just saw like the different types of designers that were there and like the skills that they have. And it's like, well, while I have some of those skills that they exhibit in those roles, they are like so much better at them than I felt that I could ever hope to accomplish. That it didn't necessarily intimidate me as much. It was like, okay, well, let me think about like what really is the right path for me to go forward. And while I was at Disruptor Beam, there are a couple of my coworkers that I had started to get pretty close to that were in the production discipline. And I started to talk to them a little bit about their work and was getting more familiar with the types of things that they did day to day, and like would have meetings with them as they're trying to help out with coming up with tools for the game that we were about to launch, which was the Walking Dead March to War. Which unfortunately has been shut down since, but just through like getting to know them and figuring out what their work was like, it became a lot more appealing to me because it put them more at the center of sort of the day-to-day business of like they were kind of had their hands in basically everything that was going on, and in a way where they were able to use their personality and their organizational skills in order to help the other disciplines be able to do their best work. And so I was like, started to think to myself that was something that I'd be interested in exploring, because I feel like those are skills that I already have been developing through various experiences, whether it was through work or just through like the film club that I had set up and like the RA stuff that I was doing. And it started to feel like a more natural evolution of what I had already been doing both professionally and personally up to that point. So that's when I started to more seriously consider it. And there was a project that Disruptor Beam was working on towards the end of my time there that actually had a need for some pretty urgent development to get done because it was still pre-release. And they needed extra hands because they had just let go of the lead executive producer on the project. So my boss at the time, who was one of the studio heads, took over the executive producer role, and he already knew that I had been interested in training up on production stuff. So he kind of took me under his wing for that time that we were clamoring to get a bunch of work done on the project.
That's cool. And I think that's important, I think, for anyone that is working in QA or like, you know, or like the other thing you did with that customer service or whatever, but there's, you know, other bigger things happening, bigger positions at a company, and you like the company, you know, getting to know people that work in a discipline that you're interested in, I think is so critical for advancement. I mean, even if you were not going to work there, right? Just learning from them is so important. Not shutting yourself off and staying in your bubble. I think it's like the worst thing you can do when you're at a company.
That was one of the I think the pitfalls that I fell into with my first gig when I was at Demiurge Studios. That was the company that I was in QA on Marvel Puzzle Quest, and it wasn't really that it was like an environment that discouraged QA from talking to other disciplines as much as we were like just located kind of in a sort of separate corner from where all the rest of the dev work was going on. And so the only times that I ever really got to socialize with any of the other disciplines or whatever would be through like our Friday social hours and stuff like that. But otherwise, the only real communication that I was having was like throwing bugs over the wall for them to fix. But I tried to spend a lot more time getting to know people once I went over to Disruptor Beam, because you're exactly right. Like if you're not talking to other people within other disciplines, then you're not really building those relationships. And especially early on when you're trying to figure out like what do you want to do and where do you want to go, that's just so important for figuring out like who you are and what is your skill set lends to most.
So you get on this project. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, so this was a unannounced mobile title that Disruptor Beam had been working on, and sort of the long and short of it was that we'd been working on this game for a while. I say we more in the general sense because I was actually still working on the Walking Dead project. I was the player support lead for that game at the time. And this project had been kicked off and was being worked on by what started out as a small development team, but was increasingly growing as time went on. And they were taking developers from both The Walking Dead and then our other live game, Star Trek Timelines. So they're growing, continuing to work on new features, having meetings with our publisher and stuff like that. And it got to a point where the publisher wasn't super happy with the work that was being done on it, and the executive producer at the time was very insistent on the direction that he was taking the project in, because he was sort of serving as like a creative lead for it as well. And he was keeping his cards very close to his chest as far as like what the status of the project was only giving him kind of minimal details on it. And it got to a boiling point where the publisher wasn't really super keen to continue the project. And they had cited the executive producer as being one of the main problems with that, is that like they just weren't getting enough status updates, enough information from him. And they ended up letting the executive producer go. And my boss, who was the creative head of it's kind of a complicated structure because I've never really seen it done this way and at other studios before. But he was referred to as a studio head. And what that really meant was that we had basically two different teams, that the head of those teams were the quote unquote studio heads. So there was the studio that was working on Star Trek Timelines, and there's the studio that was supporting The Walking Dead, as well as this new project. So it's less studio heads and more team leads because we're all still the same studio.
Right, based off whatever project they're working on at the company.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So he ended up stepping in as the new head of this project, like the new executive producer, and the publisher had given us this laundry list of things that they needed to see done, which they worked with. They worked with some people from our end. I don't exactly remember who it was.
How far are you in the development at this point?
It's still pre-release, but it's I'd say it's probably like halfway to being ready to release the game. So we still had a lot to do.
Right. And so when this happened, you were bumped to like a producer role, right?
Essentially, yeah. So I was working as the player support lead for The Walking Dead at the time, but I had expressed interest in training as a producer and started to get a little bit of exposure to that. And through this whole scenario where we had a whole bunch of stuff that we needed to do in a very short amount of time, I think we only had maybe like a month and a half or something like that. The creative head, who is my boss and had assumed control of this project, brought me in under his wing as a interim producer trainee, and essentially threw me in the deep end where it was just me and him and think maybe one other person that was helping with some project management duties, but we had to quickly organize, I think it was like 4 or 5 Scrum teams. And,
oh, geez. That's a hell of a way to see if you can swim or not.
Yeah, exactly. It was very challenging, but we established what each one of them was going to be responsible for, because we basically had like 4 or 5 different areas of the game that all of these tasks were focused on, and so the work was able to get divvy up in a way that made sense. But I was responsible for running the daily stand-ups for 2 of those teams, and working with them to make sure that they had task coordination for all the different tasks that we're going to be doing, following up with them basically every day on what like the status was of the things that they had worked on, and if like which tickets got done and stuff like that. So it really was like a trial by fire situation where it's like, okay, you wanted to get into production. Well, this is the worst version of it, like right here and now. Is like, this is it was a crunch period. Like, I'm not going to beat around the bush. Like, we were crunching to try to get as much of this done as possible. And the goal was to get the entire list. And it was pretty clear when they gave the list to us, like when the publisher gave it to us, and how much that they were asking for and by what time they needed it. Like, there was no way that we were going to be able to get it all done. But we put a pretty sizable dent into all the stuff that they were asking for. I think we probably got maybe 70-75% of the way there. And even they said that they were impressed with how much they got done, which was kind of a clear indicator that they were looking to get out of this project, like, regardless of what we put together.
So is this like kind of a way to just sink the project in a way?
I think so.
Because they were unhappy with it?
Yeah, I think that the writing was on the wall as far as like, we were trying to adapt the game closer to what they were hoping for, but it was a lot of changes to do within a really short amount of time. And I think that they had just lost interest in wanting the game anymore anyway. So they were looking to cut their losses, but also not just be like a breach of contract or whatever. So right. I think that they set up this test essentially for us to be able to see if we could get far enough, but they were setting us up for failure. Which, I mean, to give them the benefit of the doubt, like if this was a game that they didn't believe in, then it is well within their right to figure out a way to pull out of it. But it definitely made for a very difficult month and a half for the development team. And unfortunately, when the game got canceled, then that was when a round of layoffs affected the company, and that was what caused me to exit the company.
So you're kind of walking around and everybody sort of knows, really the subtext of what's happening, right? There's no one there, I would assume, who's just kind of like, all right, yeah, we can do this and we'll make it happen. It's just like, yeah, we're going to try, but this is kind of a suicide mission.
Yeah, we were under no illusions that this was going to be a insurmountable task. Like,
right.
It was, I don't want to say necessarily that people were like holding out like hope for the sake of hope, but they wanted to give it as honest of a try as they possibly could, because this is what people were passionate about. Like, this is
right.
Like, people don't get into game development because it's just something to pay the bills. Like, sure, depending on where you are, it can be very lucrative, but this is a very passionate industry with very passionate people. And if they were just interested in a paycheck, then they wouldn't be here. So they were committed to trying to make this work as best as they possibly could, despite the fact that it was going to be one of probably their roughest couple of weeks or month that they had been at the company at that point. So, I'm extremely proud of all of the work that we put into for that, despite the fact that it never saw the light of day. But people really busted their asses to try to make that work, and unfortunately just didn't work out for us.
Yeah, well, that sounds like also that opened up an opportunity for you to prove yourself as a producer and set yourself up for more success in the future. Absolutely.
I mean, I ended up landing the gig at WB Games Boston because of people that I knew at Disruptor Beam that had been. I forget if the person who got me the job if they were affected by that same round of layoffs or a previous one or what happened there, but they had already gotten a job as at WB Games Boston, and when they had a position for an assistant producer pop up and they knew that that's what I wanted to get into, then they put my name forward to the executive producer at WB, and that's how I landed at the company I'm at now.
Cool. And take us, before we get more WB stuff, take us through Crunch. Crunch is always, been a controversial topic. throughout the industry, but like you have firsthand experience and with it. So take us through that process and what that's like and what that does to you.
Crunch is a really interesting thing because like it really depends on what type of company that you're at and what type of project that you're working on for whether or not it's going to happen and what it's going to look like. Because this was a pre-release project. So like most of the stuff that I worked on through my career has been games that are already live. So it's like doing QA for making new heroes on Marvel Puzzle Quest, or doing player support for Star Trek Timelines or The Walking Dead. So this game was like the first one that was pre-release. And I think that Crunch is a lot more of a... I'll even go as far as to say that Crunch is an eventuality for something that is pre-release, because like every game has stuff that is not going at the pace that it would need to in order for everything to just totally smoothly arrive on time by the time that they're expecting to ship the product. And eventually, like, release dates are a thing. Like, the reason why companies like Blizzard or so many others will say like it's ready when it's ready is because they are trying to hold off the eventuality of Crunch as much as humanly possible. Because a release date is for developers when the bill is coming due. And if you don't have enough money to be able to cash that check, then you're going to be in trouble. So you really have to put in a lot of effort in order to be able to get the project out in the state that is expected to be for when players first get their hands on it. Now, it's a little easier when you're dealing with games that are going to be a live service, which so many mobile games are, is because there's a lot of stuff that you'll be able to add into the game after the fact, or bugs you can fix after the fact. You have several releases, like both through server-side data and through client data, so you can be shipping stuff out the door basically every day if you want to. But when you release a title, there's a certain standard of quality that it needs to meet in order for people to download your game, play your game, and stick around long enough for them to be able to become customers. And the distinction between a player and a customer is just anyone who's spent literally any money within the game. That's how most companies will typically make that distinction. So when it comes to Crunch, when it's pre-release, it tends to be an experience where, as a lot of people probably imagine that it is, it's like, here's a laundry list of all the different things that we need to do. Here's all of the tasks that need to get done. Here's all of the bugs that need to get squashed. We need to organize into teams that will allow people to be able to divide and conquer on this work in a way that makes sense. And now when you're in the thick of it, like when you're in the trenches with everyone that's working on all of these different tasks, it is very much a like heads down environment where like everyone is just like, no time to talk, need to focus on this work because I want to try my best to not stay too late tonight. A lot of people go under the assumption that they probably will be working late. And that was not uncommon during this time of working on Crunch for the project that we had at Disruptor Beam. And as a producer, it's really about trying to make sure that you give everyone everything that they possibly can in order to be able to stay undistracted, stay focused, stay heads down, and just anticipate what they're going to need, or if they need something, then get it to them as quickly as possible. So that can be communication, that can be food, that can be documents, that can be literally anything that you can think of. There were multiple occasions where during Crunch on this project that I stayed late every single day. I stayed late with our developers. I was usually one of the last people to leave. And that was because I wanted to make sure that everybody had everything that they could need. And more than once, I was responsible for, and I didn't have to pay my own money for this because they gave me the company credit card to do this, but like ordering meals for people to be able to have dinner and stay late at the studio and keep working on their stuff. I think that most days that I was there during this crunch period, I probably left the office like around, I want to say like 7:30 to 9 o'clock, somewhere in there. And I would get in the office like between 9:30 and 10.
So you'd be like 12-hour days pretty much.
Yeah, close to it.
Yeah.
And
how many weeks? You said it was like a month, right?
Yeah, it was like
during that project.
It was probably like 4 to 6 weeks that we were doing this. and it went by fast. Like that's one of the things that, I mean, your mileage may vary on your experience with it. Cause like some people, I mean, in different companies crunch for different periods of time. Like I know that for, I think this came up might have even been during your research, Graham, for the portfolio class that you were researching Rockstar games and learning about some of the crunch they were doing before. Was it Grand Theft Auto 5 or?
Yeah, I think it was 5.
Yeah. And like,
it's just brutal.
They crunch for months. Like I think that
it's like their whole development period is crunch. I think there's like a big distinction that probably needs to be made in the sense of like, you know, there's a difference between crunching for a month or two versus like that's your development life all the time. Like that to me is unsustainable to be like, we're going to work 12 to 16 hours a day all the time. Everyone's expected to do it. Fuck you kind of thing. Like, I don't know how people deal with that. Like that's too much. Someone's going to get burned out real fast that way.
Absolutely. And like, that's something that I don't think is quite as common maybe nowadays as it used to be. Like Rockstar is one of those, like, I think kind of rare examples of stuff like that happening where, it used to be a lot more commonplace. Like you'd hear about stuff like that all the time where it's like the last like 6 months to a year, or maybe even more is all just like crunching. Like you're working 60-hour plus weeks every single week. People having to come in on weekends to get their shit done.
Right.
So I'm at least through my own experience, I'm happy to say that seems to be fairly infrequent. And working on this project for Disruptor Beam was the only time. It was one of only, I think, 3 times that I experienced crunch, and it was by far the worst because it was just so long. Because crunch on a pre-release project, like I was saying earlier, is so much different from crunch on a live project, because it's like, if you're crunching on something for a live project, it means that something pretty catastrophically wrong happened with the game.
Right.
So you have people that are staying late. You have to order them food to work on some really weird, mysterious bug that makes it so that like only iOS players are unable to log into the game, and they're getting their asses kicked because they can't show up and defend their keeps in Game of Thrones Conquest. Like that's something that I have worked on before, and it's not fun, but at least it's isolated to like 1 to 3 days, and it's usually with a lot smaller group of people, because like for a problem like that, it's basically just engineering and community that you'll have to keep around and just keep the customer service reps informed. But
I think we saw this with CD Projekt Red, right? When they're trying to hit a launch window at Christmas time, and they have to get it there. So being in crunch for months at a time, it can really drain somebody. Once you're in live services, that financial need isn't as hard hitting. It's still there, but it's not to that level of extreme. Like it needs to get launched at this date, and you cannot pass it.
And that's something that comes into play a lot with live service games, as far as like, so at the company that I work at now, because I support the live operations team, and I was actually the one who was responsible for coming up with our on-call system for both within business hours and outside of business hours. There's a distinction because we eventually switched to working remotely during quarantine. So we had a need for both, but it was originally just the outside of business hours. And part of our process for whenever there's like a live issue that's happening is determining from the business perspective of like, is this a thing that needs to be addressed right now outside of business hours, or can we wait until the next day in order to address it? And we take that into we take the perspectives of a couple different disciplines into account. We take product management into account, which they're like the people who are most responsible for sustaining the business from a financial standpoint. And then there's the community and customer service perspectives of like, if we don't fix this now, then how pissed off are our players going to be? And like, how badly does this affect the content that we're running currently? So from that perspective, we have a lot more leverage that way of just like, how bad is this problem? How much is this going to impact our bottom line? Whereas like if you're pre-release, then like every day that you are not shipping your product out the door is money spent, but no money gained. So you really have to spend a lot of time and effort making sure that release goes as smoothly as possible, because you're trying to start up your cash flow with the game. And if you don't have a significant enough cash flow, then the game is not going to last.
So take me through a typical day in terms of how you structure things, organize people and tasks and things like that. I don't know what that looks like for you, but I'm curious to know because I think everyone's got a different process in terms of how they organize things and how they dictate. So I'm just curious about your personal philosophy and structure there.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a typical day is a little bit difficult of a thing to go through. So I'll walk through what a typical sprint looks like, which for us is like a 2-week period. Yeah, because things vary a lot in terms of when they happen, and the cadence of how often that you do certain things oftentimes depends on the upstream work and the temperament of your developers. So, for example, in traditional Agile Scrum methodology, you are supposed to meet with your team for a daily stand-up every single morning. And that's supposed to be basically a dialogue of like, what are the things that you're currently working on, and like, what are some of the things that you are going through with that process of working on them, so you can kind of talk it out with other people and figure out who you're going to connect with throughout the day. But our team through live operations, a lot of that ends up being because they work more just like they don't collaborate across disciplines. So it's a lot of just like they self-organize through our internal messaging channels and stuff like that, like if they need help. So stand-ups often end up being more of just like here's a status report. I'm working on this. I'm going to go keep working on that once I'm done. So doing them every day kind of broke up the rhythm of their morning a little bit too much. So we now actually only do stand-ups twice a week. And we do them entirely remotely, so people don't have to show up to like a Zoom call or something like that. They'll just handle it over Slack. And my associate producer that helps me on live operations, he follows up with people on the individual tasks that are currently in flight and when they're coming due. So that'll vary from team to team and from company to company. And I think,
are you on Jira?
Yeah, so I've worked in Jira for all 3 of the game studios that I've been in, and it's an interesting platform, and it's one of those, like, it's extremely powerful, but it's not particularly user friendly.
You know what I think Jira is like, in my experience with it, has been it's kind of like Batman and the Batman Arkham games.
Oh,
you can do all this shit, right? But do you need to do all this? What do I actually need to be successful? Like, do I need so many gadgets to the point where it's like, I don't even remember I had this?
Yep.
Yeah, that's how it feels to me.
I was going to say, in every one of those gadgets, you do not have the manual to use that gadget handy, but you need the manual, and you need to go find online where a serviceable manual exists.
It's very similar to, and the way that you're talking about Agile Scrum and how you kind of tailor it to your team's temperament. The same type of stuff happens over on our end too, where we were thinking like, okay, how far do we want to go down Agile Scrum? And knowing it and knowing the things that you can get rid of and still be like a really lean, mean machine, it makes it so much easier for everybody. Like the stand-up piece, having that remote, or like making sure when we're doing retros, like simplify it down so it's really easy for everybody to drop information in.
And a lot of that too will also depend on like how granular that your team likes to get with the tasks, or how granular that your producer will prefer to do them. Whenever I'm doing story writing, I always leave it up to the people that I am doing story writing with to tell me what they want to be written up. Because they know their work way better than I am ever going to know it. So I'm not going to tell them how their work ought to be documented. Sometimes for people who I think are not always necessarily super familiar with exactly what level of control that a producer should have over documenting their tasks, like sometimes people like defer to me of like, oh, like what do you think this task should be costly? Like what makes sense for your scale? And it's like it's not my scale, it's our scale. So you need to work with me to help me figure out like what you think should be the cost for this task.
So that's interesting. You write the tickets. You write the story tickets.
So the way that we handle it is there's some work that we're able to do to kind of prep for story writing, so that we're able to just maximize the time that I have all my developers in there working with me. Because we write our stories based on a given calendar month. So our process is that like we have an upcoming month that has not had its content planned out yet. One of our designers and one of our PMs will work together to start pulling that calendar together with all the different content that we'll be running. We do run all of our different types of events and the content verticals and stuff on like kind of concrete cadences. So there will be patterns that basically kind of flesh, like the calendar fills in itself as long as you're following the patterns for the most part. Like there's not a whole lot of like, I guess, creative agency, I'll call it, because every month has like certain things that need to be present in it. And they always happen roughly around the same time of that given month. But once that calendar is planned and it's approved, and our economy design team has come up with the rewards plan for like how we're going to distribute rewards through all these different events and stuff like that. I or my associate producer or the both of us will start writing up we'll make an epic for the calendar month. And we have a template that has all of the stories we write stories for each individual event and each individual piece of content. And for the ones that happen literally every single month, then we have a template where all of those just get brought in as soon as we create the epic. And then we fill in the gaps for anything that is not necessarily guaranteed to happen every single month. So we'll refer to that calendar plan to fill in those gaps. That's all the stuff that my associate producer and I will do on our own. And then once we have all of those parent stories, then we will have a meeting with our development team. So all of the different disciplines within live operations, that's design, product management, community, art, everybody will come in. We'll have QA in there as well. And that's when we go down parent story by parent story to write up all of the subtasks, like the individual, like those are the actual like pieces of work. Basically, the stories kind of serve as like a bucket to contain the tasks that people will really be doing. And then once all those tasks once all those subtasks on a given parent story is done, that's when the whole story, like all of the work that is contained within, gets handed over to QA to get the event scheduled and tested so they can make sure that it's ready for prime time.
And do you guys run pretty much in like 2 weeks?
2 weeks is our sprint cadence. We don't do story writing every single sprint because it really depends on how much runway that we've created for ourselves. So we have stories. So we're close to the end of May right now. We have stories written through the end of July.
So like how hands-on are you during like monitoring the sprints? Are the developers kind of moving their tickets along, or are you checking in with them over Slack and sort of doing it yourself, or what? How does that work?
It's a little bit of a mix depending on the person. Some people are really good about making sure that the tickets are all updated. Some of them are aware of the tasks that they're supposed to do and they don't really touch the ticket. Like they'll get the tickets assigned to them, but they don't touch them until they're done. So it'll go directly from open to ready for testing, basically. So it really all depends on the person. I think that the more that an individual contributor has on their plate, then the less likely they are to be like keeping everything up to date because they're kind of just frantically trying to get through as much of their work as possible so they are meeting deadlines and don't have to work late or anything like that. So yeah, it really all depends. But the stand-ups that we do are pretty good as far as like following up on tasks. That's like, hey, this is coming due in a couple of days. Like, what's your trajectory looking like for having this done on time? And if they're going to be running late for the due date, then just making sure that QA is looped in saying like, hey, I know this was due on Thursday, but it's actually going to be coming in on Monday. So that's a couple less days that you'll have to test just as a heads up. And we always build out the due dates with buffer time so that like,
yeah, got to have some cushion.
Right. Exactly. Because if every due date you have is literally a drop dead due date, then so many things are going to fall on the floor and you'll create a lot of problems for yourself. So if like it's a very simple tactic, but like if you are working on a team, then you're trying to get further ahead. And then like providing more cushion to your due dates is probably the simplest thing that you can do that will definitely pay dividends. Like you will get further ahead if you have people that are aspiring to earlier due dates. They may not necessarily meet those due dates, but like if you have something that is typically the due date is set 2 weeks ahead of its live date, and you set it to 3 weeks, you'll probably get it like 2.5 weeks before. So you're gaining a couple of days there, and that's what you want.
And your burn down chart looks great.
Right, exactly.
So what's the future for you, my friend? Are you sticking around WB Boston? Do you have any other aspirations, or are you kind of like happy where you are right now?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't really put like a ton of thought into it. There's obviously still a lot going on with WB Games Boston, and Game of Thrones Conquest is still going strong in its 5th year. So, or it's coming up on its 5-year anniversary, I think, in October. So there's definitely still a future for me here. There's still a good growth opportunity. But I mean, like most people who are like established in the industry now, like recruiters are reaching out to everybody. So like if there is an enticing offer for something, then I'd be silly not to consider it, but I'm not actively looking for anything because I'm pretty happy, I think, with the people that I work with.
Being there for so long, that's got to be nice to have that shorthand with everybody that you're working with. Instead of having to relearn the whole system of the interpersonal relationships with your team.
Absolutely. It's one of those things where, and I've gotten a lot better at this over time, but like the hardest part, I think of at least for me anyway, like the hardest part of like getting into like a new company is just like learning all of the people's names and matching names with faces and stuff like that. And I've gotten a lot more comfortable with it as time has gone on. But like, I remember when I first started at Disruptor Beam, there were people that I like reintroduced myself to multiple times there because I was just meeting so many new people that it's just like, oh, I forgot that I have already met you like twice. And we've like had a group lunch together where you were there. It's just like, because there's just so many people that you're learning so quickly. So that's one of the bigger struggles that I've had in the past, but I think I've gotten much better at that now. But you're right. The, like when you have these established relationships with people and like, you know, kind of where each of you stand and like what your role is in each other's work. I think that's something you have to build up over time. That's not something that you're just going to like show up on your first day and be like, I know what I need to do for all of you. Like you need to learn that and get to know your team, which is the most important thing that a producer can do. Like if you're not understanding the people that you work with and, at least a surface level understanding of the work that they do, then you have no hope of being able to support them with the things that they're going to need.
Yeah, just watch your plans burn to the ground if that's the case.
Yes, exactly. We went through that a little bit with a senior producer that we had that he left like close to the beginning of this year, but he had this whole plan that he had established where he was going to split our live operations team into 2 teams that would alternate every other calendar month. And it was in the aspiration of trying to create more time for each of the individual teams to focus on what we referred to as initiatives, which is basically like, this is not part of your core calendar pipeline, but they are like new event types that we want to come up with or iterations on already existing event types to make them better. And literally like the week before we were supposed to split the team, he leaves. And my associate producer and I were the ones who were left working on all of it. And we learned fairly quickly, like within 2 sprints, that I think that the plan was just formulated based off of a lack of understanding of what the team needs were and what all of the communication pitfalls were going to be when we did do that. Because it was a rough 2 sprints that we went through. And that just highlighted to me even more that like the whole concept of like servant leadership, if that's something you guys have ever heard of before, is just really important to making sure that your team is functioning and that you understand what their needs are.
Well said. Well said. And I think, Jeff, that brings us to the conclusion here. Thanks so much for spending some time with us and letting us into the journey of one Jeff Curley.
Absolutely, guys. Thanks for having me. I would definitely love to come back again sometime soon.
All right, that wraps up our interview with Jeff Curley. We want to thank Jeff again for joining the show today, and we hope you enjoyed listening to his story.
And you can find more info about Mudstack by checking us out on mudstack.com and by joining our Discord and following us on Twitter.
Well, that wraps up our show, everybody. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on Clear as Mud.